Hey guys, Legendary here, and welcome back to another Clash Royale video. Now, the Triple Elixir Global Tournament is starting up in just a few days as of the release of this video, and with recent card releases as well as balance changes switching up the meta quite significantly, the Triple Elixir meta has definitely seen quite a bit of a shift from previous Triple Elixir events. So today, I'm going to be going over the top 5 decks that I would recommend you guys play in the upcoming Triple Elixir Global Tournament, as well as just, in any other Triple Elixir event in general. Some of the decks I'm sharing today have done very well in previous global tournaments and are all very popular in many of the recent Triple Elixir events that have occurred in Clash Royale. As usual, for each deck, I'm going to be going over a quick synopsis of how the deck works and how you're going to want to play all different types of matchups. And as usual, deck links will be down in the description for those of you interested. Before we get into the video, if you could please leave a like down below and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this one. We are going for 100K. We are so close, so please just subscribe. And with all of that out of the way, let's get right into the decks. Number 1, Double Spawner Mega Knight Spam. Now, this deck and most other double spawner type decks is kind of the main meta of Triple Elixir at the current moment. And a lot of these decks that I'm sharing today either do very well against these types of decks or are going to use this combination to the best of their ability. Starting off here, of course, this is a Sim City deck, all about playing those spawners down and trying to build up as much spawner value as you possibly can. So of course, starting off the match, just cycle your spawner. Your opponents are generally going to also begin making the first play as well. What I love about Triple Elixir is that the game is going to start immediately and there's no waiting until Double Elixir before you make that first play. Back to the deck, however, this deck is very solid, and I mean, just taking a look at the composition, I think the spell-based synergy is pretty obvious. Of course, you have those spawners that the opponents are going to want to spell out, you have the Flying Machine and the Mother Witch that your opponents are going to want to spell out, and of course the Mega Knight is in there as sort of your tank, as well as your way of dealing with a ton of splash units if you have to. Now, normally most of the offenses that you're going to have with this deck are going to be off of a counter push. Because your opponents are also cycling stuff in the back as well, you can generally build up a bit of a push by simply defending what your opponent plays down, and then if you have surviving units, well, then you can simply build an offensive push off of that. Your offensive pushes are generally going to be pretty self-explanatory. It's kind of just what you got surviving off of a defense, as well as some of your spawner units, but you do have to make sure that you don't give that much spell value. Again, most of the cards in this deck are quite weak to medium spells such as a fireball, so make sure you either space your units out or you wait for your opponent to use their medium spell before going all in with all of your units. One important thing to note is that if you are facing other spawner decks as well, the best way to clog up a lane is to use a furnace, because the furnace can not only deal with other furnaces, but they're also very effective at dealing with multiple goblin huts as well. So again, if you're facing other spawner decks and you're going opposite lane, simply playing down a furnace is going to be your best bet at cheaply dealing with multiple spawners. Number 2, Mega Knight Goblin Drill. Now, this Mega Knight Goblin Drill is, a bit of a more aggressive variation of the previous deck that you saw. Because there's only one spawner building and you have both the miner as well as the goblin drill, well, you're actually going to be making offensive pushes towards your opponent's tower. Starting off the match, again, I'm always going to be cycling something quick, may that be a miner or a goblin drill to the opponent's tower, or cycling a furnace in the middle of the arena. After that, you're actually going to be playing this deck kind of like a cycle deck, in a sense that you're actually going to be playing offense with defense. In addition, the main way that you're going to be taking your opponent's tower down is going to be through chip damage with the miner, the poison, as well as the goblin drill. So if your opponent has a big push coming in, you can cycle a quick push towards the opposite lane, which will help you cycle back to a lot of the counters that you're going to need. Speaking of the defensive end of this deck, well, of course, it centers around 2 main cards, the Inferno Dragon as well as the Mega Knight. And Inferno Dragon is going to be your main way of dealing with tanks, but of course, you're going to have to worry about the Electro Wizards and the Electro Dragons that you're going to be facing. So, if the opponent has those in cycle or has those in their deck, well, maybe consider some of your secondary options. Mega Knight is going to be your main tank, and of course, we have the Furnace as well as the Goblin Drill as a defensive building to pull any building targeting units. Now, the 2 Witches are going to be also very essential to pull off some very nice defenses. Especially against decks with P.E.K.K.A, the Witch is going to be a very good option, spawning those skeletons, and in a Triple Elixir mode, a lot of decks simply won't have a good, cheap answer to take care of those skeletons. Mother Witch is also good for swarms, so depending on the matchup, you can use one a little bit more than the other. All in all, this is going to be a bit of a more fast-paced deck. You're building up much cheaper offensive pushes, but that being said, if you do have a surviving counter push, well then also feel free to send in a Miner or a Goblin Drill in support as well. Number 3, Balloon Freeze Control. Now this is of course the classic Bowler Balloon Freeze deck that's pretty much just dominant in any type of Clash Royale game mode, and especially in this Triple Elixir game mode. Now I've playtested this deck in a lot of Triple Elixir matches, and essentially how effective this deck is going to be is going to depend on how effectively you can use 2 cards in this deck: the Tornado as well as the Freeze. And because we are in Triple Elixir, you can be much more aggressive with these spells and try and get balloon connections on the tower, or to pull off efficient defenses on your side of the arena. Starting off on the defensive end, because that's mostly what you're going to be doing, Bowler and Baby Dragon are going to be your splash damage dealers, and the Lumberjack and the Inferno Dragon are going to be your tank damage dealers. Again, combining those with the Freeze or the Tornado is going to be the crux of pulling off successful defenses, so never be afraid to use the Freeze even at the very beginning of the match. On the offensive end of this deck, well, you also have several options to break through. The first is, obviously if the opponent plays a expensive card in the back, well then you can make a quick Balloon Lumberjack or Balloon Bar Barrel push in the opposite lane. Again, you can also combo the push with a Tornado or a Freeze to try and get a balloon connection, but more often than not, the goal of these types of pushes is to get your opponents to spend elixir in the opposite lane, and thus breaking up the pushes that they're trying to build up. Usually the more deadly pushes I'm going to be building is off of a successful defense when I have surviving units and I play that balloon on offense in combination with the units that I have surviving. Now that being said, a few of the decks that you're going to be facing are going to have very effective counters to that balloon. Well then in that case, you're going to have to use the Baby Dragon as well as the Bowler to try and get most of your tower damage. To do this, well, you're going to be using the Freeze as well as the Tornado. By tornadoing units towards the arena tower, well, the splash damage of the Bowler and the Baby Dragon can get some very valuable tower damage that may oftentimes even win you the match. Number 4. Giant Skeleton Fireball Bait. Now this is kind of similar to a Giant Skeleton clone deck, but because of the kind of Triple Elixir meta, clone just simply is not a very effective card, but you can sub it in for one of your support cards if you do choose so. And starting off in this match, you're going to be trying to build up some Goblin Huts, trying to get a bit of an offensive pressure immediately at the start of the match. After that, you're either going to be trying to snipe your opponent's huts with your flying machines, or you're going to be trying to defend whatever your opponent throws at you. Anything from a spawner deck with a ton of swarm units to a big beefy beatdown deck. If you're facing a swarm type deck with a lot of spawners, well then your best bet is going to be using your Giant Skeleton as effectively as possible. In addition to being able to rocket out any spawners that the opponent places close to the arena tower, you can also use the Giant Skeleton as essentially a lane clogger. Plopping that 6 elixir down can nullify a Goblin Hut as well as a Furnace combined, and it'll require additional responses from your opponents, which will likely just simply get exploded by the Giant Skeleton bomb. Looking at your other defensive options, again, you're utilizing the Fireball Bait between the Mother Witch, the Zappies, and the Flying Machine, and the Cannon Cart is also an effective unit that you use on defense that will oftentimes survive a defense and turn into an offensive counter push. And that's essentially how you're going to be breaking through with most matchups using this deck. You're building up a counter push by defending what your opponent throws at you, and then going in on offense with the surviving units that you have, again, making sure that you don't give your opponent the spell value that they want. Again, the Tornado is going to be useful in these types of offenses. Sometimes you can Tornado away what your opponent places down to counter, or you can Tornado the opponent's ranged counters into your push so that the ranged units simply just get disintegrated. In the worst case scenario, of course, you also have the Rocket to get tower damage as well. In addition to using that Rocket NATO synergy on defense to take out large numbers of units, you can also use the Rocket as a way of getting tower damage if your opponent simply just has all the counters in the world to your troops. And because the defense of this deck is honestly just so stable, you can oftentimes just afford that extra 6 elixir to continuously rocket cycle your opponents out. Number 5. P.E.K.K.A. Bridge Spam. Now this is a bit of a personal choice of mine, and for those of you P.E.K.K.A players out there, well, good news, this version of P.E.K.K.A Bridge Spam actually can hold its own in this triple elixir environment. Now I've got the Earthquake as well as the Fireball in just because of all the Fireball bait and spawners that you're going to be facing in this game mode, but overall this is going to be a much more aggressive type of deck that can also hold its own on defense as well. Starting off the match, I'm generally going to be a little bit more responsive. If the opponent plays a cheap card in the back, maybe I'll match it with a P.E.K.K.A or just play some sort of simple response. And if they play something a bit more expensive, well then I'm gonna immediately unload a lot of my Bridge Spam units into the opposite lane, forcing the opponents to respond and thus dividing up the type of push that they can build. Of course, for your Bridge Spam options, you have the Dark Prince, the Bandit, and the Ramp Rider. But in addition to a Bridge Spam type push, you can also make a sort of beatdown type push, but generally those are going to be off of a counter push where you have a surviving P.E.K.K.A and you just kind of build up a big beatdown push that way. On the defensive end, well, of course, if you're against a spawner deck, then you have spells galore that you're just gonna want to be chucking at your opponent's tower while also hitting those spawners, making sure that the opponent simply cannot build up any sort of spawner presence. Against more big, beefy tank decks, well, then you're going to be using the control element of this deck to pull off some amazing defenses. Of course, P.E.K.K.A is there to take out any sort of high HP units your opponents may have. Dark Prince and Mother Witch take care of swarms, and your E-Wiz and Ram Rider are going to be your main sources of air defense. The Ram Rider is going to be very, very essential if the opponent is running any type of balloon deck, because that snare is going to be your biggest asset in terms of slowing the balloon down and preventing it from getting that connection to the tower. All in all, a very, very fast-paced deck, but keep in mind, you have some very, very high spell power, so spell cycling your opponents out towards the end is also a very viable option. So there we go. Those are the top 5 triple elixir decks that I would recommend you guys play in the upcoming triple elixir global tournament. Again, these are decks that have been play tested and shown to work very, very well. Make sure you do actually practice in a triple elixir tournament before you play in the real deal. Unfortunately, guys, that's all I've got time for in today's episode. Huge thanks to all of my channel members. You guys are the absolute G's. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like down below as well as a subscription to my channel. And as always, this is Legend Array, and I'm signing off. See you guys next time.